My 18th birthday started at 6 in the morning with the wake-up buzzer and ended at 9 at night when I stood alone on the sidewalk, holding a garbage bag filled with everything I owned in this world. No cake, no candles, no one saying happy birthday, just Lyle Crutcher standing at the gate of Jefferson County Youth Detention Center, tossing my bag toward me like I was trash being thrown out with the weekly pickup. "Get out, Weston," he said, not even looking at me. "Don't come back. We don't need more trouble from your kind." The iron gate clanged shut behind me. The sound echoed across the empty parking lot, bouncing off the chain-link fence topped with razor wire that had defined my world for 4 long years. That fence had kept me locked inside since I was 14 years old. Now it was keeping me locked out. And somehow, almost standing on the free side of it felt even lonelier than being trapped behind it. I had $47 in my pocket, a garbage bag with 3 changes of clothes, most of them too small because nobody bothered to replace them as I grew, a toothbrush with bent bristles, and not a single place on this entire planet where anyone was waiting for me. The March wind cut through my thin jacket, a hand-me-down from some kid who had aged out years before me. I pulled it tighter, but it did nothing against the cold that had settled somewhere deeper than my skin. That cold had been there for 4 years, maybe longer. Maybe it had been there since the night the police showed up at our house, and everything I knew about my life shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. I was 14 when my parents died. Car accident, they said. In late at night on Route 47. Wet roads from an early spring rain. Dad lost control on a curve he had driven 1,000 times before. The car went through the guardrail and down the embankment, tumbling end over end until it came to rest against an old oak tree. They were gone before the ambulance arrived, both of them, together in death the way they had been together in life. I remember the officer who came to tell me. He had kind eyes, brown like my father's, and a voice that kept cracking like he was fighting something inside himself. He put his hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm, and said words I couldn't hear because there was a roaring in my ears like standing too close to a waterfall. My mother, my father, both of them, gone, just like that. One moment I had a family, a home, a future that stretched out in front of me like a road I couldn't wait to travel. The next moment I had nothing but a hole in my chest where my heart used to be. The funeral was 3 days later. I stood at the edge of 2 holes in the ground, rectangular and precise, and watched them lower my entire world into the Pennsylvania earth. The pastor said words about heaven and peace and being reunited someday, but I couldn't make sense of any of it. How could there be peace when my mother would never smooth my hair back from my forehead again? How could there be heaven when my father would never teach me to rebuild another engine? My Uncle Vernon stood beside me at that funeral, his hand gripping my shoulder too tight. Even then, something felt wrong about the way he held me. Not comforting, controlling. In a way, like he was holding me in place rather than offering support. Vernon was my father's younger brother. He had always been jealous of Dad, jealous of the house our parents had left him, jealous of the garage business that was finally turning a profit, jealous of the happy marriage, the bright kid, the life that seemed to come so easily to his older brother, while Vernon struggled with failed businesses and failed relationships. I knew this because I had heard them arguing about money more than once. Vernon always needed money. Vernon always had a scheme that was going to make him rich, if only someone would invest. Vernon always blamed everyone else when those schemes fell apart, but he was the only family I had left. My mother's father, my grandfather Emmett, had lived 3 hours away and was too old and too sick to take in a grieving teenager, or so Vernon said. For 2 weeks I lived in Vernon's house. His wife, Linda, barely looked at me, except to tell me I was tracking mud, or making too much noise, or eating too much food. His kids, both younger than me, treated me like a stray dog that had wandered into their yard and might bite at any moment. And Vernon himself spent those 2 weeks going through my parents' papers, making phone calls late at night when he thought I was asleep, meeting with lawyers in hushed conversations that stopped whenever I walked into the room. Then the police came again. This time they were not kind. This time they put me in handcuffs while I stood in Vernon's living room, too shocked to even speak. My parents had a safe in their bedroom closet. I knew about it because Dad had shown me once, told me the combination, said it was for emergencies. Inside it was cash, jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, important documents, and a few $1,000s they had been saving for my college education. After they died, someone broke into that safe. Someone who knew exactly where it was and exactly what the combination was. Vernon told the police it was me. He said he had seen me coming out of my parents' room late at night. He said I had been acting strange and secretive ever since the funeral. He said I probably needed money for drugs because wasn't that what teenagers did these days? He said maybe I had even caused the accident somehow, had done something to the car, because I had always been too interested in mechanics for a kid my age. I was 14 years old, right, or I had just buried my parents. And my own uncle looked me in the eye and lied to put me away. The public defender they assigned me was overworked and underpaid. He met with me twice, maybe 3 times, always checking his watch, always shuffling papers for some other case. He told me to take a plea deal. Juvenile detention until I turned 18. If I fought it and lost, I might get tried as an adult. I might go to real prison. I might spend decades behind bars for something I didn't do. I took the deal. What choice did I have? I was 14, I had no money, I had no one willing to fight for me. I had only the word of a grieving kid against the word of an adult, an uncle, a family member who seemed so concerned and so reluctant to accuse his own nephew. 4 years. 4 years of concrete walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered and never quite went out. 4 years of guards who looked through me like I was made of glass, like I wasn't even worth seeing. 4 years of other kids who had done things I couldn't even imagine. Kids who saw my skinny arms and quiet voice as an invitation to take whatever they wanted. But I survived. I learned to make myself small, to stay out of the way, to never look anyone in the eye long enough to be seen as a challenge or a target. I read every book in the detention center library, twice some of them. I took every class they offered. I worked in the machine shop and discovered I had my father's hands. Hands that understood how things fit together, how metal could be shaped and bent and made into something useful. And I waited. I waited for someone to come for me, someone who believed I was innocent, someone who would fight to get me out, who would prove that Vernon had lied, who would see the truth that seemed so obvious to me and so invisible to everyone else. For the first 2 years, someone did come. My grandfather, Emmett Hartley, my mother's father. He showed up every month without fail. First Sunday, 2 o'clock, like clockwork. He would sit across from me in the visitation room, a big man with weathered hands and white hair, and eyes that were exactly the same shade of gray as my mother's. He would fold those hands on the metal table between us and study my face like he was memorizing it, like he was afraid he might forget what I looked like before the next visit. Grandpa Emmett never asked me if I did it. He already knew. Instead, he talked. He told me about his machine shop in a little town called Briarwood, 3 hours west of here. He told me about the projects he was working on, inventions that would change the world someday if he could just get them right. He brought me books about engineering and mechanics, books the guards almost didn't let through because they were worried I might learn something dangerous. He told me about my mother as a little girl, running through the fields behind his property, collecting wildflowers and bringing them home in sticky fistfuls. He told me about my father, how nervous he had been when he came to ask for my mother's hand, how his voice had cracked and his palms had been sweating, and how Emmett had made him wait 3 days before saying yes, just to see what he was made of. He told me I had my mother's heart and my father's hands, and that combination could build something beautiful if I just held on long enough. "You belong somewhere, Caleb," he said once, leaning forward with an intensity that made me forget where I was, forget the guards and the cameras and the cold metal chair beneath me. "You belong to something bigger than these walls. Don't you ever forget that." I held on to those words like a rope thrown to a drowning man. Then when I was 16, he stopped coming. No warning, no goodbye, no explanation. I waited every first Sunday for 3 months. I sat in the visitation room, the same chair I always sat in, and stared at the door until my eyes burned. I willed it to open. I willed his weathered face to appear. Those gray eyes that looked so much like my mother's. That gentle voice that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely alone in the world. But the door never opened. He never came. Eventually I stopped waiting. Eventually I stopped hoping. He had abandoned me, just like everyone else. just like my uncle who had lied to put me here, just like the system that believed a 14-year-old grieving his parents was capable of robbing them, just like every foster family that had looked at my file before I even went to detention and decided I was too much trouble before they ever met me. I stopped writing him letters. I stopped dreaming about getting out and going to live in that machine shop he talked about. I stopped believing that anyone, anywhere, would ever choose me. I built walls around my heart, thick and high and covered with razor wire, just like the fence around the detention center. I put everything that hurt behind those walls. And I focused only on surviving until the day they had to let me go. That day had finally come, and now I was standing on a sidewalk with $47 and nowhere to go. I walked to the bus station because I didn't know what else to do. The Greyhound terminal was 2 miles from the detention center, a squat concrete building with flickering fluorescent lights and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. It smelled like diesel fuel and desperation, like 100,000 journeys that led nowhere good. I bought a coffee from the vending machine, burnt and bitter, and sat in the corner where I could see both exits. Old habits. In detention, you always knew where the doors were. You always watched to see who was coming and going. I was trying to figure out my next move when my phone buzzed. It was an old flip phone, the cheapest model the detention center could provide as part of my release package. Basic calls and texts, nothing else. I didn't know anyone who had this number. I hadn't given it to anyone because there was no one to give it to. The message was from a law office in Philadelphia, Bartholomew and Associates. They needed me to come in, something about an inheritance. I almost laughed out loud right there in the bus station. An inheritance. Like anyone in this world had left me anything worth having. Like there was some long-lost relative out there who had remembered I existed and decided to make my life easier. But I had nowhere else to be, and Philadelphia was only a few hours away. I bought a bus ticket with some of my precious $47 and settled into a seat near the back, where I could watch everyone who got on and off. The bus rumbled through gray Pennsylvania towns, past strip malls and fast food restaurants and churches with peeling paint. I watched it all slide by through the dirty window and tried to feel something other than empty. The law office was on the 5th floor of an old building downtown, the kind of building that had been fancy once, back when people wore hats and called each other sir and ma'am. Now the elevator groaned and shuddered the whole way up, and the carpet in the hallway was worn thin in the middle from decades of footsteps. I found the door with the name I was looking for and pushed it open. The lawyer was an older man, maybe 65, with glasses perched on the end of his nose and files stacked on every surface of his cluttered office. He looked at me over those glasses when I walked in. He's studying me the same way my grandfather used to, like he was seeing something more than just a kid in worn-out clothes with a chip on his shoulder. "Caleb Weston," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Sit down, son. We have some matters to discuss." He told me that my grandfather, Emmett Hartley, had passed away 6 months ago. Heart failure, brought on by years of stress and a condition he had hidden from everyone. He had been sick for a long time, longer than anyone knew. He had died alone in his machine shop, surrounded by his tools and his inventions and his dreams. The lawyer said it gently, like he thought the news might break me. But I had already built my walls. I had already locked my grandfather behind them with everyone else who had left me. The news landed somewhere outside those walls, painful but distant, like hearing about a tragedy in another country. "He left you everything," the lawyer continued, shuffling through papers on his desk. "The property in Briarwood, the machine shop, whatever's inside, it's all yours now." I stared at him. "There's also this." He slid an envelope across the desk. "An offer from a company called Dominion Power. They want to buy the property. $5,000 as is. They've been trying to close this deal for months." $5,000 for everything my grandfather had built, for his life's work, for the place he had talked about with such love in those monthly visits, the only love I had felt in years. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Why?" I asked. "Why do they want it so badly?" The lawyer hesitated. Something flickered in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. "Aram, I won't lie to you," he said finally. "The property is in rough shape. Your grandfather was sick for a long time before he died. He couldn't keep up with maintenance. The house needs work. The shop is..." He trailed off, searching for the right word. Neglected. That's not what I asked. He studied me for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. Dominion Power is a large energy corporation. They have interests throughout Pennsylvania. Why they want this particular property, I couldn't say. But they've been persistent. I thought about the $5,000, about how far that could take me, about starting fresh somewhere, anywhere, with a little cushion against the world. Then I thought about my grandfather sitting across from me in the visitation room, telling me I belong somewhere. And I want to see it first, I said. The lawyer nodded like he had expected that answer. He gave me the address and some papers to sign and directions to catch a bus to Briarwood. The whole time something flickered behind his eyes, something he wanted to say but didn't. One more thing, he said as I was leaving. Be careful out there. There are people interested in that property. Very interested. Your grandfather was stubborn about holding on to it. Some folks didn't appreciate that stubbornness. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. The bus to Briarwood took 3 hours, winding through hills and valleys and small towns that looked like time had forgotten them. The farther we got from Philadelphia, the more the landscape opened up. Fields stretched to the horizon. Farmhouses sat at the end of long gravel driveways. Barns, some well-kept and some falling down, dotted the rolling hills. By the end of the first week, I had learned to survive on cold food and determination. Briarwood was exactly what I expected, and nothing like what I expected at the same time. A single main street ran through the center, lined with old brick buildings and American flags hanging from the lampposts. There was a hardware store with a hand-painted sign that said, Henderson's Hardware, since 1952. A church with a white steeple reaching toward the gray sky, and a diner on the corner called Loretta's, with a neon sign that flickered like a heartbeat even in the middle of the day. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared as I walked past. I was used to being stared at. In detention, you learn to ignore it, to keep your head down and your eyes forward. But these stares were different. Curious, suspicious. Like they knew something about me that I didn't know yet. I asked for directions at the hardware store. The old man behind the counter, gray-haired and leather-skinned, looked me up and down before answering. Hartley Place, he said slowly, like he was deciding whether to help me or not. Straight down Main Street, turn left at the grain elevator. Follow the road for 2 miles, can't miss it. Big property on the right. Yellow house. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Or it used to be yellow anyway. I thanked him and started walking. The road out of town was cracked and patched, lined with fields that stretched to the horizon in all directions. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain that never quite came. My feet ached in my worn-out sneakers, but I kept going. 32 miles was nothing. After 4 years of pacing a concrete exercise yard 30 feet by 30 feet, 2 miles was a luxury. I saw the property before I reached it. 40 acres of land spreading out on both sides of the road, most of it overgrown with weeds and wild grass that had gone brown over the winter. An old wooden fence ran along the property line, collapsed in several places where time and weather had won their slow battle. And set back from the road, barely visible through the bare trees, 2 structures waited in the fading afternoon light. A house and a larger building that could only be the machine shop. I climbed over what remained of the fence and walked up the dirt driveway. Dead leaves crunched under my feet. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. My palms were sweating despite the cold. This was it. This was what my grandfather had left me. This was what Dominion Power wanted to buy for $5,000. The house had been yellow once, probably a cheerful color that stood out against the green fields in summer. Now the paint was peeling so badly that it looked like the building itself was shedding its skin. The porch sagged on one side, the boards gray and soft from years of rain and snow. Several windows were boarded up with plywood that had warped and pulled away at the corners, but the roof looked solid, and the chimney was straight. And there was something stubborn about the way the house stood there, refusing to fall, refusing to give up, just like my grandfather had been. The machine shop was worse and better at the same time. It was a corrugated metal building, rusted in places, dented in others, with a sign over the wide roll-up door that read, Hartley Fabrication, in letters that had once been bright red. Most of the letters, anyway. Time had taken some of them, leaving gaps like missing teeth. I tried the door of the house first, but it was locked. The windows were too high to reach, the porch too dangerous to climb. So I walked over to the shop. The door was heavy, made of metal that had warped slightly in its frame. It squealed when I pulled it open, a sound that echoed through the space inside and bounced off unseen walls. I stepped through and stood still, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through dirty windows high up on the walls. It was not what I expected. The shop was cluttered, yes. Tools and parts and projects in various stages of completion covered every surface. Dust lay thick on everything, in turning colors gray and muting shapes until they all blended together. But there was an order to it, a logic I could see even through the mess. Workbenches arranged by function. Tools hung on pegboards, each one outlined in markers so you knew exactly where it belonged. Projects labeled with masking tape and my grandfather's careful handwriting. This was not abandonment. This was a workspace that had been left mid-project, like whoever had been working here had just stepped out for a cup of coffee and planned to come back any minute. In the center of the space, dominating everything else, sat an old truck, a Ford F-150, maybe 1985 or so. It was rusted and dented and clearly hadn't moved in years. The tires were flat, the chrome trim was peeling, and someone had draped a tarp over the hood that had fallen half off and gotten stuck. All right, but something about it drew my attention. Something about the way it sat there, heavy and waiting, like it knew secrets it wasn't ready to share. I walked deeper into the shop, running my fingers along the dusty workbenches. I recognized some of the tools. I had learned to use ones just like them in the detention center's machine shop. My hands remembered even when my mind had forgotten, reaching automatically for the right wrench, the right screwdriver, the right size socket. My father's hands, my grandfather had called them. Then I saw it. On the workbench near the window, propped up against a coffee can full of bolts, was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. A boy, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile, squinting against summer sun. It was me. I picked up the frame with hands that had started to shake. I remembered when this photo was taken. A 4th of July picnic at my parents' house. My mother had been laughing at something my father said, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled at the corners. My grandfather had been there with his old camera, the kind with real film, capturing everything so it would never be forgotten. This photo had been here, in this shop, all this time. He had kept it. He had looked at it. Even after he stopped coming to see me, something cracked inside my chest. A small crack, but I felt it. A fissure in the walls I had built so carefully over 4 years. I set the photo down and looked around the shop again, really looking this time. There were papers tacked to a corkboard on the wall, diagrams and equations and notes in a handwriting I recognized, my grandfather's careful engineer's script. There was a calendar turned to a month 2 years ago, frozen in time. There were coffee cups, dried and stained, sitting on various surfaces like ghosts of mornings long past. He had been here. He had worked here. He had thought about me. So why did he stop coming? I stood up and began to pace, the way I used to pace in my cell when the anger got too big to contain. My foot caught on something, a ridge in the concrete floor that shouldn't have been there. I stumbled, caught myself on the old truck, and looked down. A floorboard. Wood, not concrete. And it wasn't flush with the rest of the floor. There was a slight gap on one side, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I got down on my knees and examined it more closely. The edges were carefully fitted, but time had loosened them, just enough to get my fingers under. I pulled. The board resisted, years of pressure and settling holding it in place. I pulled harder. Something cracked, and the board came free, revealing darkness underneath. I grabbed a flashlight from a nearby bench, clicked it on, and aimed it into the hole. Metal gleamed back at me. It was a box, steel, heavy-looking, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. I reached down and grabbed the handles on either side, pulling with all my strength. It was heavier than it looked, 50 pounds, maybe more. I dragged it out onto the concrete floor and sat back on my heels, breathing hard, staring at it. There was a padlock on the front, heavy brass, well-maintained, not a speck of rust on it. Someone had oiled this lock regularly, kept it working, kept this box sealed tight. I looked around the shop until I found a pry bar leaning against the wall. It took 3 tries and all my weight, but the lock finally gave way with a sharp snap that echoed through the empty space. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of bills wrapped in rubber bands. Hundreds, 50s, 20s. More money than I had ever seen in one place. More money than I had ever imagined holding in my hands. I counted it quickly, my fingers shaking. $50,000. Maybe more. But that wasn't what made me stop breathing. Beneath the money were documents, official-looking papers with seals and stamps, and legal language that made my head spin. I pulled them out carefully, afraid they might crumble in my hands, and began to read. Patent applications. For something called a closed-loop energy storage system. Technical drawings so complex they looked like abstract art. Pages and pages of specifications and test results and engineering notes. And at the top of every page, typed in clear black letters, was a name. Caleb Weston. My name. I flipped through the papers, my mind racing. Patents. My grandfather had filed patents. Under my name. For something that looked like advanced battery technology, energy storage, clean power generation. Something that could, if these documents were to be believed, revolutionize how the world used electricity. There was more. Beneath the patents was a thick envelope, heavy and cream-colored, the kind of stationery my mother used to use for important letters. I opened it and pulled out pages covered in my grandfather's handwriting, shakier than I remembered but still legible. A letter. To me. My dearest Caleb, if you are reading this letter, then I have run out of time. I am so sorry. I am sorry for so many things. For not being there when you needed me most. For leaving you alone in that terrible place. For letting you believe, even for a moment, that I had abandoned you. I did not abandon you. I could never abandon you. You are the last piece of your mother I have left in this world, and protecting you has been the only thing that mattered to me these past 4 years. But I need you to understand why I stopped coming. Why I had to let you think I had given up on you. It wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I cared too much. The technology in these patents, your father and I worked on it together for over a decade. David was brilliant, Caleb. Brilliant in ways I could barely keep up with. He understood things about energy systems that engineers twice his age couldn't grasp. Together, we developed something that could change everything. Clean, renewable, efficient. Something that could power entire communities without destroying the earth. Something that could make fossil fuels obsolete. But other people wanted it. Powerful people. A company called Dominion Power. They came to us 5 years ago with an offer. They wanted to buy the technology outright, own it, control it, bury it if they wanted to protect their existing business interests. They offered us millions of dollars, enough money that neither of us would ever have to work again. We said no. Your father believed this technology could help millions of people, and he refused to let it be locked away in a corporate vault. He wanted to share it with the world, make it available to everyone, change the future for generations to come. He was idealistic that way, just like your mother. Dominion did not take no well. For years, they pressured us, threatened us, made our lives difficult in 100 small ways. They tried to steal our research. They spread rumors about our work. They made it hard for us to get supplies, to find partners, to do anything that might move the project forward. But we held firm. We kept working. We got closer and closer to a finished product. Then came the accident. I do not believe it was an accident, Caleb. I cannot prove it. I have spent 4 years looking for proof and found only shadows and suspicions. But I know in my heart that Dominion had something to do with your parents' deaths. Your father was about to go public, to release the technology himself, and then suddenly he was gone. Both of them were gone. Your uncle Vernon was involved somehow. I don't know if Dominion paid him or if he was just a greedy man who saw an opportunity in tragedy, but he did their work for them. He got you out of the way, locked up where you couldn't ask questions, couldn't cause trouble, couldn't inherit anything that might threaten their interests. After that, I tried to fight. I tried to prove your innocence, to get you out of that place, to bring you home where you belonged. But every time I got close, they pushed back. They threatened me, And then 2 years ago, they made it clear what would happen if I didn't stop. They told me that if I kept pursuing you, if I kept coming to see you, if I showed them that you mattered to me, then you would become a target too. I had already lost my daughter. I had already lost my son-in-law. I could not lose you. So I stopped coming. I stopped writing. I let you believe I had forgotten you, had given up on you, had left you alone like everyone else. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every single day I woke up wanting to drive to that detention center and break down the walls myself. Every single night I went to sleep with your face in my mind, wondering if you were okay, wondering if you hated me, wondering if you would ever understand why I had to let you go. But I stayed away, because the only way to protect you was to make them believe you meant nothing to me. Instead, I prepared. Oh, and I filed these patents in your name, time to transfer to you fully when you turned 18. I saved every dollar I could, in cash they couldn't trace. I hid the completed prototype of our technology somewhere they would never think to look, inside the frame of my old truck. I built a legacy for you, Caleb, something they cannot take away. Something that proves you come from people who loved you, who believed in you, who wanted the world to be better because you were in it. Find Gideon Holt. He was my partner for 25 years and the best friend I ever had. He knows everything. He will help you, and take care of Rusty for me. He's an old dog now, but he was a good companion in my final years. He's staying with Loretta at the diner in town. She'll know what to do. I am sorry I cannot be there to see what you become. But I have never doubted, not for one moment, that you would become something extraordinary. You are not alone, Caleb. You have never been alone. I love you. Your mother loved you. Your father loved you. We always will. Forever yours, Grandpa Emmett. I don't know how long I sat there on that cold concrete floor with the letter in my hands. Minutes, maybe. Hours. Time stopped meaning anything. The world outside the dusty windows faded to nothing. Everything I had believed for the past 2 years was a lie. He didn't abandon me. He was protecting me. He was sacrificing his own heart, his own peace, his own need to see me, all to keep me safe. And my parents. My parents didn't die in an accident. They were killed, murdered, because they tried to do something good for the world. Sonora, the walls I had built so carefully over 4 years didn't crack this time. They shattered. 4 years of grief came flooding through the gaps. 4 years of believing I was worthless, forgettable, disposable. 4 years of telling myself that everyone who claimed to love me would leave eventually, so I shouldn't bother hoping. I had been so wrong about everything. I bent forward over the letter and let myself break open. Not quiet tears, not dignified tears. The kind of grief that tears through your chest and leaves you gasping for air. The kind that empties you out completely, leaves you hollow and shaking, but somehow cleaner afterward. I cried for my parents, whose deaths were not an accident. I cried for my grandfather, who died alone in this shop with my picture on his workbench. I cried for the boy I had been before all of this. The one who believed in family and love and belonging. And somewhere in the midst of all that grief, something else began to grow. Anger, cold and clean and focused. They had taken my parents from me. They had taken my grandfather. They had stolen 4 years of my life. They had made me believe I was worthless. They were going to pay. Outside, through the dirty windows, I saw lights in the distance. Headlights coming up the road toward the property. Multiple sets of them, moving in formation. I wiped my face with my sleeve and stood up. I tucked the letter inside my jacket, close to my heart where no one could take it. Then I went to face whoever was coming. Now, if you've been following this story, I want to pause here for a moment. Caleb just discovered that everything he believed for 2 years was a lie. His grandfather didn't abandon him. His grandfather was protecting him, sacrificing his own happiness to keep Caleb safe. Have you ever discovered a truth that completely changed how you saw someone? Have you ever realized that someone you thought had hurt you was actually trying to help you all along? Share your story in the comments below. And if you want to know what happens when those headlights reach Caleb's property, make sure you subscribe and keep watching, because what comes next changes everything. 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway, their headlights cutting through the fading afternoon light like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners. They parked in a neat row in front of the machine shop, engines still running, exhaust rising in white clouds against the cold air. The doors stayed closed, and I stood in the doorway of the shop and waited. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. Whatever was coming, I had faced worse. 4 years in juvenile detention teaches you that fear is a luxury you can't always afford. The driver's door of the lead vehicle opened first. A man stepped out, and immediately I knew he was in charge. Everything about him announced it. The tailored charcoal suit that fit like it had been made for him specifically. The polished leather shoes that reflected the gray sky. The silver hair swept back from a face that was handsome in a cold, calculated way, like a model in a magazine for expensive watches. He walked toward me with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and couldn't imagine what the word meant. "Caleb Weston," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of something southern in the vowels. "At last! I've been looking forward to meeting you." I said nothing. I had learned in detention that silence was sometimes the most powerful weapon you had. It made people uncomfortable. It made them fill the space with their own words, their own mistakes. The man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He was not used to being ignored. "Allow me to introduce myself. Preston Vance, CEO of Dominion Power." He gestured at the property around us, the overgrown fields and the sagging house and the rusted shop. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Still, I said nothing. "I understand you recently inherited this property," Preston continued, unfazed by my silence. "My condolences on your grandfather's passing. Emmett was a memorable man. Stubborn, but memorable. You knew him." Preston's eyebrows rose slightly, pleased that I had spoken. "Of course. We had dealings over the years. Business negotiations, mostly. Unfortunately, he was never willing to see reason. I'm hoping you might be more pragmatic." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick and white, and held it out to me. $50,000, he said. "Cash. For the property as is. That's 10 times what we offered through the lawyer. I thought a gesture of good faith might help us start our relationship on the right foot." $50,000. Enough to start a new life somewhere. Enough to disappear, to become someone else, to put all of this behind me and never look back. Then I thought of the letter in my jacket, the patents with my name on them, the prototype hidden in the old truck behind me, the truth about my parents. "Why?" I asked. Preston tilted his head. "Why what? Why are you offering 10 times more than it's worth? Why are you here personally, the CEO of a major corporation, to buy a rundown property from an 18-year-old kid?" Something shifted behind his eyes. The smooth mask slipped, just for a second, revealing something harder underneath. Something dangerous. "Because I'm a generous man," he said. "Because I want this transaction to be quick and painless for both of us. Because," he paused, his smile turning thin, "because I know you just got out of juvenile detention this morning, and I imagine you could use a fresh start. $50,000 could give you that." There it was, the threat wrapped in kindness, the reminder that he knew exactly who I was, where I came from, what I had been through. The implication that he could make my life very easy or very difficult, depending on what I chose. "You've been watching me," I said. "I keep tabs on matters that interest me." I stepped forward out of the doorway until I was standing face to face with him. He was taller than me, broader, older. He had power and money and an army of lawyers and probably politicians in his pocket. But I had something he didn't have. I had nothing left to lose. "My grandfather wouldn't sell," I said. "Why not?" Preston's jaw tightened. "Your grandfather was a stubborn old fool who couldn't see what was best for him. He held on to this worthless property out of sentiment, out of pride, out of some misguided notion that he could change the world. And what happened to people who couldn't see what was best for them?" The mask slipped further. Oh, for just a moment, I saw real anger in his eyes. Real danger. "Be careful, boy," he said softly. "You're young. You've had a hard life. I understand that. But you don't know who you're dealing with." I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with everything I wasn't saying. The letter in my jacket, the truth about my parents, the fury building in my chest like a storm waiting to break. The back door of the second SUV opened. A man stepped out, shorter than Preston, with a face I knew all too well. A face I had seen every day for 4 years, sneering at me from behind his desk, telling me I was worthless, telling me I would never amount to anything, telling me that kids like me always ended up right back where they started. Lyle Crutcher, the administrator of Jefferson County Youth Detention Center, and the man who had made my life hell for 4 years and then thrown me out this morning like garbage. "Hello, Weston," he said, walking forward to stand beside Preston. "Surprised to see me?" My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "What are you doing here?" Crutcher smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. "Mr. Vance and I have had a business relationship for some time now. You see, when Dominion needed to keep an eye on certain persons of interest, they reached out to people in various positions, people who could be helpful, people who understood that cooperation was more profitable than principles." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "The letters," I said. Crutcher's smile widened. "My grandfather's letters, the ones he tried to send me. Watch, you stopped them. Can't have incarcerated youth receiving outside influence that might disrupt their rehabilitation," Crutcher said, his voice dripping with false concern. "It's policy, standard policy, for their own good, you understand." 4 years. 4 years of believing my grandfather had abandoned me. 4 years of building walls and hardening my heart and convincing myself I was unlovable, unforgettable, unwanted. All because of this man. All because of the man standing beside him. All so they could steal what my family had built. "You son of a—" I lunged forward before I could stop myself. Preston stepped back smoothly, and 2 security guards appeared from nowhere, grabbing my arms, holding me back. I struggled, but they were bigger than me, stronger than me, and I was still weak from 4 years of institutional food and limited exercise. Now," Preston said, brushing off his sleeve, as if my approach had somehow contaminated his expensive suit. "Let's keep this civil, shall we? Mr. Crutcher was simply doing his job, as was everyone else involved in your situation." I stopped struggling, but my whole body was shaking with rage. "My situation? You mean my parents' murder?" Preston's face went absolutely still. Behind him, I saw Crutcher's eyes widen with surprise. "Oh, yes," I said, feeling a savage satisfaction at the way his composure cracked. I know everything. My grandfather kept records, detailed records, about your threats, about your pressure campaigns, about the accident that happened right when my father was about to go public with the technology you wanted so badly." For a long moment, no one moved. The guard's hands tightened on my arms. Crutcher looked nervously at Preston, and Preston himself stood very, very still, calculating. "You're making very serious accusations," he said finally, his voice soft and controlled. "Accusations that could get a young man with your history into a great deal of trouble. Who would believe a juvenile delinquent over a respected business leader? Who would even listen? People might listen if I had evidence. And do you have evidence?" I thought of the letter, the patents, the journal that my grandfather mentioned in his letter. Whatever else might be hidden in this shop, in this property, in the old truck sitting in the middle of the floor. "I guess you'll have to wonder about that," I said. Preston studied me for a long moment. His eyes were cold, calculating, weighing options and outcomes. Then he nodded to the guards, and they released my arms. "You're more like your grandfather than I expected," he said. "Stubborn, short-sighted, willing to throw away a comfortable future for principles that don't matter in the real world." He turned and walked back toward his SUV. At the door, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "This property will be mine eventually, Caleb, one way or another. The only question is how much you're willing to suffer before you accept that." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not accepting anything." The SUVs pulled out in reverse order, their tail lights disappearing down the road like predator eyes fading into the darkness. I stood in front of the shop and watched them go, my heart pounding, my hands still shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. They had killed my parents. They had stolen 4 years of my life. They had made my grandfather die alone, afraid, unable to be with the people he loved. And now they thought they could intimidate me into giving up everything? I went back into the shop and started searching. The next week was the hardest of my life. Dominion moved fast. The morning after Preston's visit, I walked into town to buy supplies and found that every store owner suddenly remembered urgent business in the back when I approached. The man at Henderson's Hardware, who had given me directions just days before now, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Can't help you," he mumbled when I asked to buy some basic tools. "Best move along." At the bank, I tried to open an account to deposit some of the cash from the box. The manager, a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit that strained at the buttons, emerged from his office before I even reached the counter. "We're not accepting new clients at this time," he said, loud enough for the whole bank to hear. "Especially not clients with certain backgrounds." Word had spread. The story of my juvenile detention, twisted and exaggerated and poisoned, had raced through the small town like wildfire. I heard whispers as I walked down Main Street. Thief, troubled youth, dangerous. One woman pulled her daughter close and hurried past me like I might attack at any moment. Back at the property, I found that the electricity had been shut off. Non-payment, according to the notice taped to the door of the house. My grandfather's bills, supposedly unpaid for months. When I called the power company from a payphone in town, I was transferred through a maze of automated messages until I finally reached a human who told me the earliest someone could come. Look at the account was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks without power? In March, in Pennsylvania, with nights that still dropped below freezing? The water went next. Same story. Same runaround. Same impossible bureaucracy designed to make me give up. That night I huddled in the corner of the machine shop with 3 blankets from the house wrapped around me and ate cold beans from a can I'd found in the pantry. The wind howled outside, finding every crack and gap in the metal walls. The darkness was absolute except for the small circle of light from my flashlight, which I had to turn off to save the batteries. I had never felt so alone in my life. On the 3rd night, someone broke in. I woke to the sound of shattering glass, sharp and violent in the silence. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness of the shop, sweeping back and forth like searchlights. Voices, harsh and muffled, barked orders I couldn't make out. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the pry bar I had been keeping close since Preston's visit. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. 4 years in detention had taught me how to face threats, how to stay calm when everything inside you was screaming to run. 3 men in dark clothes were tearing through the shop, pulling things off shelves, dumping drawers onto the floor, searching for something. One of them had a crowbar, another had what looked like a hammer. The third was going through the papers on my grandfather's desk, shoving them into a bag. When they saw me standing there with my pry bar, they stopped. "The kid's here," one of them said. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "Find the documents." The old man said they were in the shop somewhere. They knew. They knew about the documents. They knew what they were looking for. I didn't wait for them to make the first move. I launched myself at the nearest one, swinging the pry bar with everything I had. It was a short fight. 3 against 1, all of them bigger than me, better fed, better rested. I got in a few good hits, enough to draw blood from one, enough to make another stagger back. But then something hit me in the back of the head and the world exploded into stars. When I came to, they were gone. The shop was trashed. Papers scattered everywhere. Tools thrown on the ground. Equipment damaged or destroyed. But they hadn't found the box. I had moved it after that first night, burying it in the field behind the shop, marking the spot with a stone only I would recognize. The patents were still safe. The letter was still in my jacket. They had, however, found the photographs on the workbench. The picture of me as a child was on the floor, the glass shattered, the frame broken. I picked it up carefully, shaking off the broken glass. In the photo, I was smiling. I couldn't remember the last time I had smiled like that. I tucked the photograph into my jacket next to the letter and limped outside into the pale dawn light. There had to be another way. There had to be someone in this town who wasn't afraid of Dominion. I mean, someone who remembered my grandfather as something more than a target. I made my way down the road toward Briarwood, one painful step at a time. The diner was called Loretta's. I had noticed it my first day in town, the neon sign flickering bravely against the gray sky. The windows steamed up from the warmth inside. Now in the early morning light, it looked tired but welcoming, like an old friend who had seen too much but still tried to smile when you walked through the door. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Coffee and bacon and something sweet, maybe pancakes or maple syrup. My stomach cramped with hunger. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten something hot, something that wasn't cold beans from a can. A woman stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface with a cloth. She was maybe 58 or so, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that showed a lifetime of hard work. When she looked up and saw me, something flickered across her face. Recognition. "You're him," she said. "Emmett's grandson." I nodded, too tired and too hungry to speak. She came around the counter faster than I expected, her eyes taking in my battered face, my torn clothes, the way I was favoring my left side where someone had kicked me. "Lord have mercy," she breathed. "What did they do to you, child?" Before I could answer, she was guiding me to a booth, pressing me gently down into the vinyl seat, calling over her shoulder to someone in the kitchen. Within minutes, a plate appeared in front of me. Eggs over easy, bacon crispy, just the way I liked it, toast with real butter, and the largest cup of coffee I had ever seen. "Eat," she commanded. "We'll talk after." I ate. I ate like I hadn't seen food in a week, which wasn't far from the truth. I ate until the plate was clean and then soaked up the last of the egg yolk with the toast. The woman, Loretta, sat across from me and watched with the kind of patient attention that reminded me painfully of my mother. When the plate was empty and I was working on my second cup of coffee, she leaned forward. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said softly. "The best man I knew. He helped a lot of people in this town, people who were struggling, people who had nowhere else to turn, including me." She paused, her eyes going distant with memory. "When my husband died 8 years ago, I couldn't make the mortgage payments on this place. The bank was going to take it. Everything I had built, everything we had built together, gone. Emmett paid those payments for 6 months, wouldn't take a penny back, said neighbors take care of each other, and that was just what neighbors did. Then why is everyone else in town treating me like I have the plague?" Loretta's face hardened. "Because they're scared. Dominion Power has their fingers in everything around here. Jobs, loans, contracts. Half this town works for them, directly or indirectly. When they spread the word that helping you was bad for business," she shrugged, her mouth twisting. "Most people can't afford to take that risk. They have families, mortgages, bills to pay. But you can?" She smiled, and for a moment I saw something fierce and unbroken in her eyes. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's letter. Of his refusal to give in no matter what they threatened. "I'm 60 years old," she said. "I own this diner outright, thanks to your grandfather. I've got no children depending on me, no husband to worry about. I've got nothing left they can threaten me with." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "And I made a promise to Emmett years ago. If anything ever happened to him, I'd look after his dog. And I'd look after you too, if you ever showed up needing help." She whistled, a short, sharp sound, and I heard the click of claws on linoleum. A dog emerged from the kitchen doorway, an old golden Labrador, his muzzle white with age, his movements slow and careful, like every step cost him something. But his tail was wagging, and when he reached the booth, he pressed his nose against my hand and inhaled deeply. Then he whined. A soft sound of recognition that made something inside me break open again. "Rusty," I whispered, and my voice cracked on the name. The dog looked up at me with eyes that had seen too many losses and found something familiar. He rested his heavy head on my knee and sighed like he had finally found what he was looking for. "He knows you," Loretta said softly. "He can smell Emmett on you. You're wearing his jacket, aren't you?" I nodded. I had found my grandfather's old work jacket in the house and had been wearing it ever since. It was warm and worn soft and smelled faintly of machine oil and sawdust, and wearing it felt like being wrapped in a hug from someone who was no longer there. Rusty climbed up onto the booth seat beside me, which was clearly against diner policy, and just as clearly something Loretta was going to ignore. I put my arm around the old dog and felt something inside me loosen slightly. I wasn't completely alone anymore. Let me pause here again, because this is important. Sometimes when we're at our lowest, when we think there's no one left who cares, The people who save us are the ones we least expect. Strangers who become family. Animals who offer love without asking anything in return. Have you ever had someone appear in your life at exactly the moment you needed them most? A friend, a neighbor, even a pet? Someone who showed up when everyone else had turned away? Share your story in the comments. These connections matter more than we realize. They remind us that we're never truly alone. And make sure you subscribe and keep watching. Because Caleb is about to discover something that will change everything he thought he knew about his parents' death. The door to the diner opened, bringing with it a gust of cold March wind and the smell of coming rain. I looked up from my coffee and saw an old man stepping inside, maybe 70, with white hair cut short and weathered skin, and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime working with metal and machines. He saw me and stopped dead in the doorway. "Emmett," he whispered. Then he blinked, shook his head like he was clearing away cobwebs, and looked again. No, no, you're the boy, the grandson, Caleb." Loretta stood up from the booth. "Gideon, I was going to call you this morning." The old man walked toward our table slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. And there was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. Surprise, yes, but also something deeper. Hope, maybe, or grief. "You look just like your mother," he said when he reached the booth. Same eyes, same stubborn set to the jaw. He slid into the seat across from me, moving Loretta's empty coffee cup aside. "I'm Gideon Holt. Your grandfather was my partner for 25 years, my best friend, the finest man I ever knew." I remembered the letter. Find Gideon Holt. He knows everything. "He mentioned you," I said. "In his letter." Gideon's eyes glistened, and he blinked rapidly. "Did he? I hoped he would. He talked about you all the time, you know, about the visits to that place, about how much you reminded him of your mother, of your father. He stopped coming." "I know." Gideon's voice was heavy with sorrow. "I know why, too. It nearly killed him, that decision, but he thought he was protecting you. He thought if he stayed away, if he made them believe you didn't matter to him, they would leave me alone." Gideon nodded. "He wrote to you, you know, every week for 2 years, right up until they made him stop. When the letters kept coming back unopened, he nearly lost his mind." My throat tightened. They weren't unopened. They were intercepted by a man named Lyle Crutcher. He was working for Dominion. Gideon's face went hard as granite. "Those sons of—" He stopped himself, glancing at Loretta. "Sorry. Don't apologize on my account," Loretta said grimly. "I've been calling them worse for years." Gideon leaned forward across the table, his voice dropping low. "Caleb, I need to know. The shop. Did you find what Emmett left for you? The box?" I nodded. Relief washed over his face like a wave breaking on shore. "Thank God. We were worried Dominion might have gotten there first. When I heard you were coming, when Emmett's lawyer called me, I tried to get to the property. But by the time I arrived, those black SUVs were already pulling out. They offered me $50,000. And you turned them down." It wasn't a question. "They killed my parents," I said, and the words came out flat and cold. "They tortured my grandfather for years. They stole 4 years of my life and made me believe I was worthless. I'm not selling them anything. Not now. Not ever." Gideon studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for something. Whatever he saw there, it seemed to satisfy him. A slow smile spread across his weathered features. "Good," he said. "And because I've been waiting a long time to finish what your grandfather started, and I think you might be exactly the person to help me do it." 3 days passed before we were ready to fully examine the truck. 3 days of Gideon coming to the shop each morning with tools and coffee and memories. 3 days of Loretta sending Jesse, her teenage nephew, with extension cords and supplies and hot meals. 3 days of the community slowly, cautiously reaching out, despite Dominion's threats. The electrician who had worked with my grandfather for years showed up with wire and junction boxes. A retired machinist from a town over drove in with spare parts. A farmer I never met left fresh vegetables at the end of the driveway, never showing his face. Dominion had tried to isolate me. Instead, they had awakened something in this community, A network of people who remembered Emmett Hartley's kindness and weren't willing to let his legacy die without a fight. But Dominion wasn't giving up either. On the fourth morning, I found Gideon lying on the floor of the shop, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "They came at night," he said as Loretta pressed a clean cloth to his wound, her face pale with fury. "Three of them. Masks, dark clothes, crowbars. They wanted to know where the prototype was." "Did you tell them?" He gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I didn't tell them anything, Caleb. I didn't tell them a single thing." I looked at this old man, 70 years old, beaten and bleeding, who had stood up against violent men to protect something my grandfather had built, who had refused to break even when breaking would have been so much easier. "All right, we need to find whatever else is hidden," I said. "Before they do." Gideon nodded, wincing at the movement. "The truck. Emmett always said the real secret was in the truck." Gideon was right. The old Ford F-150 sat in the center of the shop like a patient waiting for surgery. Rust had eaten through the wheel wells, the tires had rotted flat, and the interior smelled of mildew and mouse droppings. But when we started examining it closely, when we started looking beyond the surface, we found something extraordinary. "There's something wrong with the weight distribution," Gideon muttered on the second day of our examination. He had been walking around the truck, tapping on panels, listening to the sounds they made. "The frame is heavier than it should be, and the transmission housing," he tapped it again, "hollow. There's a cavity in there that shouldn't exist." It took us 3 hours to access the compartment built into the transmission housing. We had to remove panels and supports, careful not to damage whatever was inside. When we finally exposed the hidden space, Gideon let out a long, slow breath. "David," he whispered, "David, if you could see this." The prototype was smaller than I expected. Maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, encased in protective housing that my grandfather had designed to withstand decades of neglect. Even covered in grease and grime, it gleamed with purpose. But there was something else in the compartment. Another container, smaller, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. "What's that?" I asked. Gideon's hands trembled as he lifted it out. "I don't know. I didn't know he had hidden anything else." We opened it together. Inside was a journal, thick, leather-bound, filled with my grandfather's handwriting, and tucked into the back, in a separate envelope, were photographs. Surveillance photos by the look of them. Pictures of men in suits meeting with my Uncle Vernon. Pictures of cars parked outside my parents' house in the weeks before the accident. Pictures of a restaurant parking lot, and one photograph that made my heart stop. A man in work coveralls crouching beside a car in that parking lot. The car was my parents' old sedan. The man's face wasn't visible, but his company ID badge was. The logo on it was unmistakable. Dominion Power. "My God," Gideon breathed. He found proof. Emmett found proof. I took the photograph with shaking hands. My parents' car. A Dominion employee. The night before they died. My vision blurred, but not from grief this time. This was fury, white-hot and absolute. "They murdered them," I said. "They actually murdered them." Gideon put his hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather spent 4 years looking for this. He must have found it near the end, must have hidden it here with the prototype, because he knew." His voice broke. He knew he was running out of time. I opened the journal and began to read. Page after page of dates, times, names, every interaction with Dominion Power, documented meticulously. Every threat, every attempt at bribery, every mysterious accident that had befallen people who stood in their way. And near the end, dated just months before my grandfather died, a single devastating entry. "I have found proof. A former Dominion employee, dying of cancer, he confessed to me what he witnessed. The car, the brake lines, the order that came from Preston Vance himself. My son-in-law and daughter were murdered because David refused to sell what we had built. I cannot go to the police. Dominion owns too many people in this county. But I can prepare. I can make sure that when Caleb comes of age, when he finds what I have hidden for him, he will have everything he needs to bring them down." I closed the journal and looked at Gideon. "We have to be smart about this," I said. "We can't just go to the local police. My grandfather was right. Dominion owns too many people. Then what do we do? We prove the technology works, I said slowly, the plan forming in my mind even as I spoke. We prove it publicly, so visibly that they can't cover it up. And then we release everything. The journal, the photographs, all of it. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. There's something else I need to tell you, he said. Something I should have told you from the beginning. I waited. Before I came to work with your grandfather, I worked for Dominion Power. I was their chief engineer for 15 years. I stared at him. I left because I saw what they were capable of, he continued, his voice heavy with old guilt. The corners they cut, the communities they poisoned, the people they hurt to protect their bottom line. When I refused to help them cover up a contamination incident, they forced me out. He reached under the workbench and pulled out a box I had never seen before. I came to Emmett because I knew he was building something that could challenge everything Dominion stood for, and I brought something with me. Documents. 1 internal memos. 15 years of evidence that could help bring down the entire company. He set the box on the workbench. Combined with your grandfather's journal and those photographs, it should be enough. More than enough. I looked at the box, then at Gideon, then at the prototype sitting on the bench. Why didn't you use this before? I asked. Why didn't you come forward? His face crumpled with old pain. Because I was afraid. Because they threatened my family. What little I had left. Because I told myself I was doing enough good by helping Emmett, by staying hidden. He met my eyes. Because I was a coward. You're not a coward, I said. You got beaten defending this place. What, you kept secrets for 25 years to protect people you loved. I let your grandfather die alone because I was afraid to stand beside him at the end. The words hung in the air between us. Raw, honest, full of grief and regret. Then help me now, I said. Help me finish what he started. Help me make sure they pay for what they did. Gideon straightened his shoulders. Something changed in his eyes, the fear giving way to something harder, something brighter. All right, he said. Let's bring them down. A week later, I called the law office in Philadelphia and asked for a referral to a lawyer who specialized in fighting large corporations. Someone who wasn't afraid of power or money or threats. The name they gave me was Nadine Ashford. 3 days passed before Nadine could make the trip from Philadelphia. 3 days of waiting, a planning and praying that Dominion wouldn't make another move before we were ready. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, driving a sensible sedan that had clearly seen better days. She was in her early 40s, with short dark hair and the kind of face that had been hardened by battles lost and won. Her handshake was firm, her eyes were sharp, and she listened without interrupting while I told her everything. The patents, the prototype, my grandfather's letter and journal, the photographs, Gideon's documents, the intimidation, the threats, the break-ins, everything. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with cool, analytical eyes. You know who I am, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Gideon had told me. 5 years ago, Nadine Ashford had been a rising star in corporate law. She had taken on Dominion Power in a class action lawsuit on behalf of a small town whose water supply had been contaminated by their operations. She had lost. Not just lost, she had been destroyed. Dominion's legal team had outspent her 10-1, buried her in paperwork, dragged the case out for years until her clients ran out of money and hope. By the end, she had lost her firm, her reputation, and nearly her sanity. I know why you're here, she said. You're looking for someone who hates Dominion as much as you do. Someone who's willing to risk everything for a chance at justice. I'm looking for someone who won't give up. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I don't give up. I never gave up. I just ran out of ammunition. She pulled out a legal pad and a pen. Show me what you've got. We spent the next 3 hours going through the documents, the patents, the journal, the photographs and internal memos Gideon had saved for 15 years. Everything we had. When Nadine looked up from the last page, something had changed in her expression. The cool analysis was still there, but underneath it was something that looked almost like hope. This is real, she said. This is all real. It's real, I confirmed. These patents are airtight, filed correctly, dated correctly, with your name as the sole assignee. No matter what Dominion claims, they can't challenge your ownership. But ownership doesn't prove what they did to my parents. No, she agreed. For that, we need the prototype to work. We need to go public in a way they can't suppress or spin. And we need to release all of this evidence at exactly the right moment. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. Here's what we're going to do. This is the turning point. Caleb and his allies have the evidence. They have the prototype. They have a plan. But Dominion isn't going to give up without a fight. And in part 3, everything comes down to a single moment that will determine whether justice prevails or whether the powerful once again escape consequences for their crimes. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up against someone more powerful than you? Someone who had every advantage? What gave you the courage to keep fighting? Share your story in the comments. Your experiences matter. They might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And subscribe now, because in the final part of this story, Caleb risks everything for one last chance at justice. Dominion made their final move 2 weeks later. Preston Vance himself delivered the ultimatum, standing in the doorway of the machine shop with 2 lawyers flanking him like attack dogs. $500,000, he said. Final offer. Take it and walk away. Start a new life somewhere far from here. Forget all of this ever happened. I stood my ground. I'm not selling. You don't understand what you're refusing. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but his eyes were cold as a Pennsylvania winter. That money could set you up for life. No more struggling, no more fighting. You could disappear, start over, become anyone you want to be. Like my parents disappeared? His face went hard. Be very careful, boy. Or what? You'll do to me what you did to them? Preston stepped closer, lowering his voice so the lawyers couldn't hear. You have no idea what we're capable of, he said. No idea what we've done to protect our interests. Your grandfather thought he could stand against us, and look where it got him. Alone, forgotten, dead. He's not forgotten, I said, and neither is what you did. Preston's smile was thin as a knife blade. You have until Friday. After that, my lawyers will bury you in litigation that will last longer than your natural lifespan. Every dollar you have, every person who has helped you, every hope you've ever held, we will destroy it all. Then I guess I'd better make Friday count. He stared at me for a long moment, trying to find the fear he expected to see. He didn't find it. You'll regret this, he said finally. How'd it maybe, I replied, but not as much as you're going to regret what you did to my family. He left without another word. I watched his car disappear down the road, and then I went back inside to finish what we had started. The night before Dominion's deadline, the shop was crowded with more people than it had ever held before. Gideon was at the workbench, making final adjustments to the prototype we had spent weeks preparing. Nadine was on her phone in the corner, coordinating with contacts at 3 different news networks who had agreed to cover what we were about to do. Pastor Jebediah Crow was leading a quiet prayer circle near the door, his deep voice a steady counterpoint to the nervous energy filling the room. And Loretta was doing what Loretta always did, keeping everyone fed and calm, with Rusty pressed close to her side. The old dog hadn't left me alone in weeks. He followed me everywhere, sleeping at the foot of my makeshift bed, pressing against my leg whenever I stood still long enough. It was like he knew something important was coming and wanted to make sure I didn't face it alone. Are you sure about this? Nadine asked, covering her phone with one hand. Once we go public, there's no taking it back. Dominion will come at you with everything they have. I looked around the room at the people who had gathered. Gideon, who had carried his guilt for 15 years and was finally ready to face it. Loretta, who had lost her husband and nearly lost everything but still found room in her heart to help a stranger. Pastor Jebediah, whose faith told him to stand with the righteous even when the righteous were outnumbered. All the people from Briarwood who had shown up tonight, defying Dominion's threats because they remembered the kindness of one old man who had never stopped believing in this community. I'm sure, I said. Gideon looked up from the workbench. It's ready. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the prototype, sitting in the center of the space like the heart of something new and powerful, waiting to be born. I walked over and stood beside it. The casing was clean now, polished, every component checked and double-checked. 20 years of work, 3 generations of sacrifice, all leading to this moment. I thought of my grandfather, alone in this shop for so many years, working towards something he knew he might never see completed. I thought of my father, who had dreamed of sharing this technology with the world. And I thought of my mother, whose smile I could barely remember, but whose love I carried with me every day. I thought of the boy I had been 4 years ago, standing at the edge of two graves, not knowing that everything he believed about his life was about to be torn away. And I thought of the man I was becoming, the one who had chosen to fight even when fighting seemed impossible, the one who had learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid, but about moving forward anyway. "This one's for you, Grandpa," I whispered. "For you and Dad and Mom. For everyone who believed in something better." I reached out and flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Gideon's face was pale with tension. Loretta gripped Rusty's collar like she was afraid they might both float away. Pastor Jebediah's lips moved in silent prayer. Then there was a sound, a hum. Low at first, barely audible, then building and building until it seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. The indicator lights on the prototype shifted from red to amber to green. And then, all at once, the lights in the shop blazed to life. Not just the shop. Through the windows I could see the outside world transforming. The security light on the old barn that hadn't worked in years. The porch light on the house. The string of Christmas lights someone had hung on the fence and never taken down. All of them glowing with clean, steady, impossible power. "It works," Gideon whispered, his voice breaking. "It actually works." But we weren't done yet. The power kept spreading, rippling outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The lights in the nearest neighbor's house flickered on, then the next house, and the next. In town, half a mile away, the streetlights that had been dark for months suddenly blazed with life. The neon sign on Loretta's diner, broken for 3 years, flickered once, twice, and then lit up the night sky like a beacon. People started emerging from their houses. First one, then a dozen, then what seemed like the whole town, drawn outside by the impossible sight of lights coming on everywhere, all at once, powered by something they didn't understand but could feel in their bones. Someone started cheering. Someone else was crying. I heard Pastor Jebediah's voice, strong and clear, saying, "Glory be to God," over and over again. And somewhere in the crowd, someone was recording everything on their phone. The video went viral within hours. Ari, 18-year-old orphan, activates revolutionary energy technology. That was the headline that spread across social media like wildfire. The footage showed everything. The lights coming on, the crowd of supporters cheering, my face lit by the glow of my grandfather's invention. By morning, there were reporters from every major network camped outside the property. By noon, Nadine had given 3 interviews and released the first batch of documents from Gideon's files to every news outlet that would listen. By evening, the FBI had opened a formal investigation into Dominion Power. And by the next morning, Preston Vance was in handcuffs. I watched them lead him away on the television in Loretta's diner. His expensive suit was rumpled, his silver hair disheveled, his face gray with shock and fury. He had been arrested at the airport. They were trying to board a private plane to a country with no extradition treaty. Lyle Crutcher was arrested 3 hours later, found hiding in a motel 2 counties away. The man who had stolen 4 years of my life, who had kept my grandfather's letters from ever reaching me, who had been Dominion's inside man at the detention center for years. The charges kept growing as the investigation expanded. Fraud, corruption, conspiracy, criminal negligence, environmental crimes going back decades, and finally 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. My parents' case was being reopened. After 4 long years, someone was finally going to answer for what happened on Route 47. I need to pause here one more time because this is important. Justice came. After years of suffering, years of fighting, years of believing it might never happen, justice finally came. But victory doesn't always feel the way we expect it to. It doesn't always bring the closure we need. Sometimes winning just reveals how much we've lost. Have you ever achieved something you worked hard for, only to find it didn't heal the wounds you thought it would? How did you find peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with me until the end, because Caleb's story isn't quite finished yet. I sat in a corner booth at Loretta's diner with Rusty pressed against my side, watching the news coverage play out on the screen above the counter. People kept coming by to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me how proud my grandfather would have been. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things. But inside I felt hollow. I had won. Against all odds. When against one of the most powerful corporations in the country, I had won. So why didn't it feel like victory? That evening, Loretta found me sitting on the porch of the old house, watching the sun set over the fields. She lowered herself onto the step beside me, her knees creaking with age, and for a while, we just sat together in silence. "It's not supposed to feel this way," I said finally. "What way is that, hun?" "Empty." I stared at my hands, the hands my grandfather had said were just like my father's. I thought when it was over, when they were caught, when everyone knew the truth, I thought it would feel like something. Relief, satisfaction, closure, something. Loretta was quiet for a long moment. The sky was turning colors, pink and gold and purple streaking across the clouds. "You spent 4 years believing you were alone in the world," she said softly. 4 years building walls to protect yourself. And now those walls are coming down, and you're realizing that all that anger and pain were the only things holding you together. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. "It's okay to grieve," she continued. "For your parents, for your grandfather, for the boy you used to be before all of this. You've been so busy fighting that you haven't had time to feel any of it." "I don't know how," I whispered. "I don't know how to stop fighting." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers warm and worn. "You don't have to figure it out tonight. You don't have to figure it out alone." Rusty pushed his head under my other hand, demanding attention, reminding me he was there. I scratched behind his ears, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his old body against my leg. I thought of my grandfather sitting in this same spot, watching this same sunset. Had he felt this way too? Lost even when he was surrounded by people who cared about him? Fighting even when the fighting was over? Maybe that was the real legacy he had left me. Not just the technology or the money or the property, but the understanding that grief and love were two sides of the same coin, that you couldn't have one without the other, that healing meant letting yourself feel the wound. I sat on that porch until the stars came out, more stars than I had ever seen in my life. Loretta stayed with me, and Rusty stayed with me, and gradually the hollow feeling in my chest began to fill with something else. Not happiness, not yet, but something quieter. Something that might, in time, grow into peace. 1 year later, I stood in front of the machine shop and looked at what we had built. The sign above the door was new, painted in bright colors that caught the afternoon sun. "Hartley Weston Energy," it read, a combination of my grandfather's name and mine, a bridge between generations. The shop itself had been completely renovated. New windows that actually let in light. New roof that didn't leak. New equipment that hummed with clean energy, powered by the very technology we were helping to spread across the country. The patents had turned out to be worth more than I could have imagined. Not because I sold them to the highest bidder, but because I did exactly what my father would have wanted. I licensed the technology to clean energy developers, to community cooperatives, why, to anyone who wanted to build something better for their piece of the world. The royalties were more than enough to live comfortably, more than enough to fund everything I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was help. The Emmett Hartley Foundation had been established 6 months after the prototype activation. Its mission was simple: provide scholarships and support services to young people aging out of the foster care system in juvenile detention. Kids like me, who had no one waiting for them on the other side, who were told they were worthless and disposable and would never amount to anything. So far, we had helped over 200 kids find jobs, housing, education, hope. We had partnered with advocacy groups to reform the systems that had failed so many. We had given voices to people who had been told their voices didn't matter. Ian and we were just getting started. Gideon had become a partner in the new company. At 71, he had more energy than he'd had in years. He spent his days training a new generation of engineers, teaching them the principles he and my grandfather had developed over decades of work, making sure this technology would outlast all of us. Loretta still ran her diner. I still ate breakfast there every morning, in the same booth where she had fed me when I was hungry and broken and had nothing. Her neon sign, powered by clean energy now, was a landmark in Briarwood. Tour buses sometimes stopped so people could take pictures with it. Pastor Jebediah had become something of a spokesman for what people were calling the Briarwood miracle. He gave interviews about how a small town had stood up against corporate power, and about faith and community, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win. His church was fuller than it had been in decades, and Rusty was still with me. He was slower now, 13 years old, his muzzle completely white, and his joints stiff on cold mornings. But he still followed me everywhere, still pressed against my leg when I stood still, still slept at the foot of my bed every night. The vet said he probably didn't have much time left, but he seemed determined to stay as long as he could. He had been my grandfather's companion at the end. Now he was mine. It was a Sunday afternoon, exactly 1 year after the prototype activation, when I finally visited the cemetery. I had avoided it for months. Every time I thought about going, something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. Or the simple fact that I didn't know what to say to people who weren't there to hear me. But today felt different. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and something inside me had finally settled enough to face what I had been avoiding. The cemetery was small and old, tucked away on a hillside outside town. The kind of place where generations of families were buried side by side, their stories carved into weathered stone. Wildflowers grew between the graves, and old oak trees spread their branches overhead. I found them together, 3 headstones in a row. David Weston, beloved husband and father. Sarah Weston, née Hartley, beloved wife, mother, and daughter. Emmett Hartley, beloved father, grandfather, and friend. I stood there for a long time just looking at their names. "I did it," I said finally. My voice sounded strange in the quiet. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if there's anything left of you to hear. But I did it. I finished what you started." The wind stirred the leaves overhead. Rusty sat beside me, patient and still. "I found the truth. I proved what they did. They're going to prison, all of them. Vance, Crutcher, the others. They're never going to hurt anyone again." I knelt down and touched my grandfather's headstone. The stone was warm from the sun. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I was angry at you for so long. I thought you abandoned me. Thought you stopped caring. I thought I wasn't worth fighting for." A lump rose in my throat. "I understand now. I understand why you did what you did. Why you stayed away even though it was breaking your heart." I moved to my parents' graves. My 2 people I barely remembered now, whose faces I saw only in photographs, whose voices I couldn't recall no matter how hard I tried. "I wish I had more time with you," I said to them. "I wish I remembered more. But I know you love me. I know you fought for something bigger than yourselves, and I'm trying to do the same thing." I reached out and touched both their headstones, 1 hand on each. "I'm not alone anymore," I said. "I found people who care about me, who chose me, who love me not because they have to, but because they want to." The wind blew again, warm and gentle. "I'm going to be okay," I said. "I promise. I'm going to be okay." Rusty pressed against my leg, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. We stayed there until the sun began to set. Man and dog. Mine surrounded by the people who had loved me even when I couldn't feel it. That evening, I sat on the porch of the old house, the same porch where I had sat so many times over the past year, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real. The house was fixed up now. Fresh paint, new windows, a solid roof that didn't leak. But I had kept some things the same: the creak of the third step, the slight list to the floorboards in the living room, the smell of old wood and memories. It felt like home. Finally, after 18 years of searching, I had found home. Loretta came up the driveway, carrying a casserole dish like she did every Sunday. She settled into the chair beside me and handed over the dish without a word. "Chicken pot pie," she said. "Your grandfather's favorite." "Thank you," I said. "For everything." "You've thanked me enough, child." "I'll never thank you enough." She reached over and squeezed my hand, the way she always did, the way my mother might have if she had lived to see me grow up. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. "Can I tell you something?" I asked after a while. "Always. For 18 years, I believed I was worthless. I believed nobody wanted me. I believed I was destined to be alone forever. Loretta waited. I understand now how mistaken I was, I said. My grandfather loved me enough to sacrifice everything. My parents loved me enough to fight for something that would make the world better, even knowing the risks. And this community, people who barely knew me, they stood up and fought when I had nothing to offer them in return. That's what family does, Loretta said simply. I looked at her, at this woman who had become like a mother to me over the past year. I never understood what that word meant before, I said. Family, I thought it was about blood, about DNA, about legal obligations and accidents of birth. And now I know it's about choice, about showing up for each other, about loving someone not because you have to, but because you want to. Rusty climbed slowly up the porch steps and collapsed at my feet with a contented groan. He was tired and his time was running short, but he was here. He was choosing to be here, just like everyone else. I used to think I was the boy nobody wanted, I said. Now I understand the truth. I was always wanted. I was always loved. Hummer, I just couldn't see it. Loretta's eyes glistened. She pretended it was the fading light. The last rays of sunset faded into purple twilight. Stars began to appear, one by one scattered across the infinite sky. I thought about everything that had led me here. The loss, the pain, the years of darkness, and then the light that had come after, slowly at first, then all at once. My grandfather had hidden the truth to protect me, but he had also left me everything I needed to find my way back. The patents, the prototype, the letter, and most importantly, the knowledge that I was loved. I was still learning what to do with that knowledge, still figuring out how to let people in, how to trust, how to belong. Some days were harder than others, but I wasn't doing it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Anna, thank you for staying with me through this entire story. This isn't really about technology or corporate greed or legal battles. Those are just the backdrop. This story is about family, the family we're born with and the family we find along the way. It's about the sacrifices people make for the ones they love, even when those sacrifices are misunderstood. It's about second chances and new beginnings and the courage to keep going when everything seems lost. Most of all, it's about belonging. All of us want to belong somewhere, to someone. We want to know that we matter, that our lives have meaning, that we're not just taking up space in the universe, and sometimes the place where we belong isn't the place we expected. The people who become our family aren't the people we were born to, but that doesn't make them any less real, any less important, any less ours. So let me ask you something as we reach the end of this journey together. Have you found your place, your people, your family? If you have, hold on to them. Tell them you love them. Show up for them the way they show up for you. And if you haven't found them yet, don't give up. Keep looking. Keep believing. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you. Someone is ready to choose you. Someone is ready to become your family. You just have to give them the chance. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own family and your own journey, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. We share stories about hope, about second chances, about finding where you belong. Stories that remind us we're not alone, no matter how dark things might seem. Leave a comment and tell me what this story meant to you. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Have you ever discovered that someone you thought abandoned you was actually protecting you all along? Share your story. It might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who matter to you. And remember, you are not alone. You have never been alone. You belong.